Someone get this woman a chair. The last thing we need is her breaking a hip trying to teach real soldiers how to fight." The words dripped with casual, confident cruelty as they echoed across the polished concrete floor of the observation deck. The crowd, a nervous assembly of Fort Valor's top cadets, rippled with uneasy laughter, the kind of laughter that sought permission, a nervous reflex, to align with the perceived authority in the room. That authority was Sergeant James Mitchell, a barrel-chested former Delta Force operator with 25 years of combat experience etched into the lines of his weathered face. He stood with his hands on his hips, a permanent smirk below his immaculate flat-top haircut, the very picture of institutional arrogance. Mitchell was the gatekeeper of this final test, the man who decided who was worthy of advancement. His gaze was fixed on the woman standing calmly by the central command console of the Forge Fort Valor's most advanced combat simulation facility. She offered no reaction to the barb, no flinch, no defensive retort, no tightening of the jaw. Her focus remained entirely on the diagnostic screen, her fingers moving with liquid economy across the holographic interface, her posture a study in placid neutrality. But when Colonel William Blackwood, watching from the shadowed corner of the room, saw the way she stood, not on her feet but through them, a subtle, perfectly balanced distribution of weight that spoke of a different kind of grounding, he felt a cold prickle of recognition. He saw not a broken soldier, but a weapon that had been reforged. The woman Catherine Kate Steele was the new civilian contractor brought in to oversee the final certification trials in the forge. To the cadets and to Sergeant Mitchell, she was an anomaly, an unwelcome disruption to the established order. She was not old, perhaps in her mid-30s, but carried an air of stillness that seemed ancient. Her dark hair was pulled back in a functional ponytail, her uniform a simple, unadorned set of black fatigues devoid of rank or insignia. The only things that drew the eye were the subtle, almost imperceptible seams just below her knees, where the fabric met the matte black carbon fiber of her advanced Schmidt Titan TX9 prosthetics. These were the source of Mitchell's derision, the visible evidence he used to build his case for her inadequacy. He saw them as a mark of failure, a sign that she had been broken by the very profession she now purported to teach. Each time she moved, his eyes would flick to her legs, a silent emphasis of his unspoken argument. How could someone who couldn't even stand on their own 2 feet presume to teach elite warriors? 3 days earlier, in Colonel Blackwood's office, that argument had been made explicit. "With all due respect, sir," Mitchell had said, the formality barely masking his indignation. "Bringing in an outside contractor for the forge evaluations undermines everything we've built here. These men need to be tested by operators who've been there and done that, not by somewhat." Sergeant Blackwood had interrupted, his voice level but carrying an edge of steel. Mitchell had caught himself recalibrating. Some civilian consultant who's never faced real combat conditions. Blackwood had simply stared at him for a long moment, then slid a manila folder across the desk. "Her credentials. Read them." Mitchell had opened the folder, scanned its heavily redacted contents, his expression unchanging. "Impressive on paper, sir, but paper isn't the battlefield." The forge isn't the battlefield either, Sergeant. It's a tool. And Ms. Steele happens to be something of an expert with this particular tool." Now, as Kate connected her personal data pad to the control terminal, Mitchell continued his monologue, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear a performance for the benefit of his students. "I mean, look at it, her," he said, the word her transformed into an insult. "This is the sharp end. We are training warfighters here, not data analysts. They need to learn from men who've been there, done that, not someone who, well, couldn't hack it." The silence that followed was thick with judgment. The cadets shifted their weight, their eyes darting between the loud, confident sergeant and the silent, focused woman. They were young, impressionable, taught to respect the chain of command and the voice of experience. Mitchell was that voice, a constant, blustering presence on the training grounds. Steele was an unknown quantity, a ghost in the machine. Her silence was unnerving. It felt less like weakness and more like a deliberate, controlled withholding. While Mitchell filled the air with noise, she continued her work. A soft chime indicated the system was calibrated. She tapped a final sequence on the screen, her movements precise, devoid of any wasted energy. She didn't look at him. She didn't acknowledge the cadets. Her entire universe was the complex tactical problem waiting to be unleashed within the digital walls of the arena below. This absolute lack of engagement was in itself a powerful repudiation. It was a statement of such profound confidence that it needed no words. It communicated that his opinion, his insults, his very presence were irrelevant variables in the equation she was currently solving. As her fingers danced across the terminal with practiced efficiency, Kate's mind briefly flashed to another time, another place. 12 years earlier, at the Special Forces qualification course, where her instructor, a granite-faced master sergeant with 3 Purple Hearts, had drilled into her head the fundamental truth of asymmetric warfare. The real battlefield isn't the terrain, it's the mind of your enemy. Control that and you've won before the first shot is fired. She remembered the endless hours spent not just learning to fight, but learning to think, to anticipate, to adapt, to see the chessboard 10 moves ahead. And later, she remembered being part of the team that designed the very core algorithms that powered the Forge, not just as a user of the system, but as one of its architects. The system recognized her biometric signature as she donned the specialized interface gloves. The neural feedback tingled against her fingertips, a familiar sensation that connected her directly to every aspect of the simulation. This wasn't just a computer to her, it was an extension of her consciousness, a digital realm where she had once reigned supreme. The insults were not a singular event, but a continuous barrage, a calculated effort by Sergeant Mitchell, to undermine Kate's authority before the trial even began. He saw her presence as a personal affront to his own expertise, a challenge to the grizzled, boots-on-the-ground wisdom he prided himself on. "You see cadets," he announced, pacing before the large observation window that overlooked the sprawling modular cityscape of the simulation floor. Combat is a physical reality. It's about muscle memory, endurance, the ability to push your body past its limits. It's about carrying your brother on your back when he's hit. It's about running toward the sound of the guns. With each sentence, he would glance pointedly at Kate, at the unmoving line of her prosthetic legs beneath the tactical pants. He was painting a picture of a warrior and deliberately excluding her from it. The cadets' products of a system that lionized physical prowess nodded along. They had spent years honing their bodies into weapons, and Mitchell's words resonated with their entire experience. They looked at Kate and saw through his biased lens an administrator, a technician. They saw the prosthetics, and their minds filled in a story of weakness, of a career cut short, of someone relegated to the sidelines. They couldn't see the ghost of an 18-kilo pack on her shoulders, or feel the phantom weight of the M110 enhanced sniper rifle she could assemble and disassemble in under a minute in total darkness. They saw only what was absent, not what had been forged in its place. Kate, meanwhile, was connecting her personal adaptive interface to the OP4 control terminal. The opposing force, the simulated enemy the cadets would face, was typically run by a rudimentary AI or a junior instructor. It was considered a trivial role. Mitchell had assigned it to her with a dismissive wave of his hand, a gesture meant to put her in her place. "You can run the targets from here, ma'am." He had said the word ma'am transformed into an insult. "Should be simple enough for you to handle. Just try not to trip over any cables." The cadets had snickered again. Kate simply slid a cooling sleeve over her left prosthetic's primary actuator, a routine gesture for anyone running high-output cybernetics, but to the uninitiated, it looked like a strange, almost medical procedure, further cementing their perception of her as fragile. She flexed her carbon fiber toes. The internal mechanisms emitted a barely audible whir, a sound that was to her as natural as a heartbeat. She was not just standing, she was interfacing with the floor, feeling the subtle vibrations of the facility's power conduits, her sense of the environment extending beyond the normal limits of human perception. Colonel Blackwood saw it all, the cadets' misplaced confidence, Mitchell's preening arrogance, and Kate's profound, unnerving calm. He had read her file a document so heavily redacted that the black ink seemed to outweigh the white paper. He knew what was coming, and he remained in his corner, a silent arbiter, allowing events to unfold naturally. He understood that some lessons cannot be taught in a classroom. They must be witnessed. They must be felt. They must be earned through the shattering of deeply held assumptions. Alpha Squad, the elite 6-man unit led by Captain Ryan Turner, was the pride of this year's class. Turner had served 2 tours with the 75th Ranger Regiment in Afghanistan before being selected for officer training. Under Mitchell's tutelage, Alpha had set records in every evaluation metric. They moved with synchronized precision, born of endless drills and shared hardship. Mitchell had taken them to the Mojave Desert 2 months earlier for extreme environment training, using the same old-school methods that had forged Delta operators during the Cold War, sleep deprivation, limited resources, and punishing physical demands. They had emerged from that crucible bonded by a shared certainty in their own excellence. Now they stood at the entrance to the simulation area, checking their training weapons and tactical gear. These weren't mere laser tag approximations. The simulation rifles delivered painful feedback impulses when a trainee was hit, and the environment could be remotely configured to create everything from blinding smoke to deafening explosions. The forge itself was a marvel of military technology, a DARPA-funded multi-million-dollar facility that replicated urban combat environments with uncanny fidelity. Its modular design could transform from Middle Eastern marketplace to Eastern European apartment block within hours. Today, it was configured as a multi-story apartment complex deliberately modeled after the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, where the 1980 hostage crisis had unfolded a scenario that remained relevant in modern counterterrorism training. The final preparations were complete. Captain Turner gave a confident thumbs up to Sergeant Mitchell through the glass. Mitchell clapped his hands together. All right, people, listen up. Alpha Squad is going in. Their mission is a hostage rescue, high-value target, third floor East Wing. Standard rules of engagement. I expect a new facility record today. He turned to Kate with one last condescending smirk. Let's show our guest contractor how the professionals do it. Kate's eyes, which had not once wavered from her console, flickered. On her screen, a single icon blinked: OP4 control, engaged. She placed her hands on the controls, and in the deafening silence of her focus, the game began. The simulation began with a textbook breach. Alpha Squad, led by Captain Turner, moved with the synchronized, aggressive grace that Sergeant Mitchell had drilled into them for months. They blew the door to the simulated apartment complex and flowed inside a six-man unit moving as one. In the observation room, Mitchell narrated their actions with paternal pride. See that? A perfect dynamic entry, overwhelming force, maximum aggression. They've established a foothold in seconds. The AI won't know what hit it. He glanced at Kate, expecting to see her fumbling with the controls, flustered by the speed of the assault. But her expression was one of serene, almost detached observation. Her hands moved over the holographic interface with a surgeon's precision, not in a frantic rush, but with a calm, deliberate rhythm. She wasn't reacting to the squad's entry. She had been waiting for it. She had anticipated it down to the microsecond. The first anomaly occurred 30 seconds in. The squad's communication network, a secure, military encrypted channel, suddenly filled with static, then went dead. Turner tapped his headset, frowned, then switched to hand signals. Mitchell's brow furrowed. Minor glitch, they can handle it. But it wasn't a glitch. Kate had executed a simulated signals warfare attack, not just jamming their frequency, but subtly hijacking it. For the next 2 minutes, she fed them ghost signals, the faint sound of a woman crying from a room to their left, the scrape of a rifle barrel from the floor above. She was manipulating their senses, turning their own training against them. The squad, trained to react to auditory cues, hesitated. They split their focus. 2 men peeled off to check the sound of the crying woman breaching a room that was empty. It was a classic feint, something you'd read about in a manual, but Kate's execution was flawless. She was playing them like a violin. Mitchell's confident smile began to falter as he watched his elite team being systematically dismantled without a single enemy combatant being deployed. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing as if trying to perceive the invisible threads Kate was pulling. As the 2 men cleared the empty room, Kate activated her first real trap. The lights in the hallway flickered and died, plunging the corridor into absolute darkness. The squad's night vision goggles flared to life, bathing the world in an eerie green glow. But Kate had anticipated this too. She triggered a series of concealed infrared strobes calibrated to the exact frequency of their NVGs. To the cadets, the world became a blinding, disorienting pulse of white light. They were effectively blind. Panic began to set in. Their perfect, choreographed assault had dissolved into chaos. In the observation room, the smug look on Mitchell's face had evaporated, replaced by slack-jawed confusion. "What the hell is this? What's she doing?" he muttered, staring at the tactical display that showed the squad's icons frozen in disarray. Kate's face was illuminated by the soft blue light of her console. A bead of sweat trickled down Mitchell's temple. The silence in the room was now heavy, accusatory. The cadets watched their nervous laughter, long forgotten, replaced by a growing sense of awe and dread. They were not watching a simple training exercise. They were watching a predator dismantle its prey with chilling efficiency. Kate had not deployed a single virtual enemy combatant. She hadn't needed to. She had turned the environment itself into a weapon. She had weaponized darkness sound and their own expectations. The squad was being defeated, and they hadn't even fired a shot. Desperate to regain control, Captain Turner divided his squad to cover more ground. Kate had predicted this too. On her personal interface, she activated a program she had secretly uploaded to the Forge's mainframe, Ghost Protocol. It wasn't part of the standard simulation suite. It was her own creation designed to bypass every security protocol the squad had been trained to counter. As Alpha teams separated, Kate isolated them not just physically, but psychologically. For the two men moving up the main stairwell, she created the sounds of a firefight above them, the distinctive crack of M4 carbines, the thud of grenade explosions, shouts in a foreign language. For the pair checking the west corridor, she simulated radio transmissions from their teammates directing them toward a false contact point. For Turner and his communications specialist, she rendered the building's internal mapping system useless, feeding false data to their tactical tablets. Mitchell watched in growing horror as his prize unit fell apart. These were the exact psychological warfare tactics that his own Delta unit had encountered in Iraq, tactics that had nearly cost them a mission. He hadn't taught his men how to counter them because he'd never expected to encounter them here in a standard training exercise. The final sequence was a masterclass in psychological warfare. With the squad blinded and disoriented, Kate began to contract the environment around them. She activated the building's simulated fire suppression system in the floor above, creating the sound of heavy running footsteps that seemed to be converging on their position. She used directional speakers to project the sound of enemy combatants, speaking in a language the cadets didn't understand, adding to their confusion and isolation. On the observation deck, the main screen showed the biometric readouts of the 6 cadets. Their heart rates were spiking, their breathing ragged. They were experiencing the physiological effects of genuine terror. Sergeant Mitchell could only watch his fists clenched at his sides. His entire doctrine of aggressive, overwhelming force was being systematically taken apart by an opponent who was invisible, intangible, and seemingly omniscient. He had taught his men how to fight soldiers. He had never taught them how to fight a ghost. Captain Turner, trying to regain control, ordered his men to fall back to the initial breach point. It was a logical decision, a retreat to a known secure position. But Kate was 3 steps ahead. As they moved back down the darkened, strobing hallway, she sealed the door they had originally breached. A simulated steel fire door slammed shut with a deafening clang, the sound echoing through the facility. They were trapped now, and only now did she introduce the OP4. They didn't come through doors or windows. On the tactical display, 6 red icons materialized, rappelling down the outside of the building and smashing through the windows of the hallway. A perfect synchronized assault from an unexpected axis. The blinded, panicked cadets were caught completely in the open. The end was swift. A series of soft thuds from the simulation vests indicated fatal hits. One by one, the green icons representing Alpha Squad turned red on the main screen. Turner was the last to fall, his icon blinking out as he tried to return fire at a target he couldn't see. Total time from initial breach to squad neutralization, 4 minutes, 17 seconds. It was a new facility record, but not the kind Sergeant Mitchell had boasted about. It was the fastest, most comprehensive failure in the history of the Forge. A profound, deafening silence descended upon the observation room. The screens displayed the final brutal calculus. Alpha Squad 0 kills 6 casualties. OP4 6 kills 0 casualties. Mitchell stared at the screen, his face pale, his mouth slightly agape. He whispered a single phrase, a mantra of pure disbelief. "No way. That's not possible. That's a system glitch. It has to be." He turned to Kate, his eyes wide with a mixture of rage and confusion. "What did you do?" For the first time, Kate Steele turned her head and looked directly at him. Her face was calm, her expression unreadable. She said nothing. Her silence was more damning than any accusation. It was the silence of absolute, undeniable competence. The cadets looked from their humiliated instructor to the quiet woman at the console, and for the first time they saw her. They saw the focused intensity in her eyes, the relaxed confidence in her posture. They saw a professional whose actions had just spoken with more thunderous authority than all of Sergeant Mitchell's shouted words combined. The myth of the grizzled sergeant was cracking, and the legend of the quiet contractor was beginning to be born. It was into this thick, suffocating silence that Colonel Blackwood finally moved. He stepped out from the shadows of the back wall, his movements deliberate, his presence immediately commanding the attention of every person in the room. The cadets instinctively straightened their postures. Sergeant Mitchell, looking lost and deflated, turned toward the colonel, a desperate plea for validation in his eyes. But the colonel's gaze was not on him. He walked past the disgraced sergeant without a word, his polished boots making sharp rhythmic sounds on the floor, each step a hammer blow against the fragile silence. He stopped directly behind Kate Steele, who was now running a post-simulation diagnostic, her focus already having moved on from the stunning victory to the data it had produced. Instructor Steele, the colonel's voice was calm but carried an unmistakable weight of authority. She swiveled in her chair, the movement fluid and silent, and looked up at him. Colonel, she acknowledged her tone, even in professional. Blackwood gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He then turned to the main console, the one Mitchell had been using to monitor the squad. "Computer," he commanded, his voice ringing with the clarity of a man accustomed to being obeyed by both men and machines. "Bring up instructor personnel file, authorization code Blackwood Theta 9. The screen, which still showed the grim final tally of the simulation, flickered and was replaced by a secure military personnel file interface. A name appeared in stark white letters, Steele Catherine N. Beneath it, most of the fields were populated with a single frustrating word, redacted. But the colonel was not finished. "Override security classification, Tier 1 authorization, O6 command prerogative." The screen blinked again. The redactions began to dissolve one by one. Words and phrases materialized, each one landing like a physical shockwave in the minds of the onlookers. The cadets leaned forward, their eyes wide. Mitchell's face, already pale, turned ashen. He looked as though he was witnessing an apparition. The first line to clear was her former unit designation. It was not a regular Army unit or a standard branch. It was a string of letters and numbers that few in the room had ever seen, a designation that existed only in the shadowy world of clandestine operations, Joint Special Operations Command Task Force Black. The room felt suddenly cold. Task Force Black was a ghost unit, a legend whispered about in barracks, but never acknowledged officially. They were the ones sent to places that didn't exist on any map to solve problems no one could ever know about. The screen continued to populate with data, a litany of impossible achievements. The list of qualifications and commendations scrolled down the screen, each line more unbelievable than the last. Codename Phantom. The name hung in the air, a whisper of myth. Cadets who followed military history knew the name. Phantom was a specter, a legendary operator from the early days of the War on Terror, credited with dozens of high-stakes missions, but whose identity and even gender were subjects of wild speculation. To see that name attached to the quiet woman with the prosthetic legs was a cognitive dissonance so profound it felt like a physical blow. The screen kept scrolling. Combat deployments 14. The number was staggering, more than triple what a highly decorated career soldier might accrue. Special qualifications. Master CQC Instructor Tier 1 Operator, Director of Asymmetric Warfare Simulation. That last one caused a fresh wave of shock. She wasn't just a user of the system. She had been on the team that designed it. She hadn't just beaten them in the forge. She had built the very walls of the arena herself. Then came the awards: Distinguished Service, Cross Silver Star, with 3 oak leaf clusters, Bronze Star with Valor Device, Purple Heart with 4 oak leaf clusters. The last award explained the prosthetics, but it did so in a language of such profound sacrifice and heroism that it completely reframed the narrative. Her legs weren't a sign of failure. They were a testament to her survival mettle, forged in flesh and bone and blood, on a battlefield none of them could even imagine. The final line of the visible record was a mission summary, heavily redacted, but with a few key phrases left intact. Operation Iron Veil, sustaining catastrophic injuries while single-handedly holding a defensive position against overwhelming enemy forces. Actions directly responsible for the successful extraction of SEAL Team 3. Sergeant Mitchell made a small, choked sound. SEAL Team 3 was his old unit. He had built his entire identity, his entire career at the academy, on the reputation of having served with the best. The revelation that this woman whom he had openly mocked had saved men from his own tribe, perhaps even men he knew, was a blow from which his ego would never recover. It was the ultimate, most personal form of vindication. Colonel Blackwood let the information hang in the air for a full minute, allowing its weight to settle and crush the ignorance that had filled the room just moments before. He then turned his back to the screen and faced Kate, who had now risen from her chair to stand before him. He did not offer a handshake or casual word of thanks. He did what soldiers do in the presence of undeniable greatness. He snapped his body to the rigid, formal posture of attention and rendered a salute. It was not the perfunctory gesture an officer gives a subordinate. It was the sharp, crisp, deeply respectful salute a warrior gives to a legend. "Instructor Steele," he said, his voice now devoid of any ambiguity, filled with ironclad respect. "My sincere apologies for my sergeant's lack of professional courtesy. It will not happen again." The message was clear. This wasn't just about Mitchell. It was a lesson for everyone in that room. Assumptions kill, respect is earned, and the most dangerous person in the room is often the one you see the least. As the reality of who Kate Steele truly was began to dawn on everyone present, she simply turned back to her console, her fingers once again dancing across the interface. Her focus returned to the data scrolling across her screen. The battle was over. The lesson had been delivered. And somewhere in the recesses of her mind, in a place where the memories of gunfire and screams still echoed, the ghost of a smile played across her lips. The colonel's salute still hung in the air, a gesture of respect so profound that it had transformed the atmosphere into the observation room. The cadets remained frozen, processing the revelation that had just unfolded before them. Sergeant Mitchell stood rigid, his face a battlefield of conflicting emotions, humiliation, warring with disbelief, anger, giving way to a dawning, uncomfortable respect. But for Kate Steele, the moment had already passed. She had returned to her work fingers, moving across the holographic interface with practiced precision. To her, the simulation wasn't just an exercise in humbling arrogance. It was data, valuable information about the weaknesses in their training protocols. She was already cataloging them, preparing recommendations, her mind racing ahead to solutions, while others were still grappling with what they had witnessed. Colonel Blackwood understood this about her. He had seen it in her file in the after-action reports that spoke of her legendary focus, how she could maintain mission clarity while others lost themselves in emotion. It was what had made her such a formidable operator and what made her such a valuable instructor now. He stepped back, allowing her space to complete her analysis, and turned to address the stunned cadets. "What you just witnessed," he said, his voice carrying the weight of command, "was not a system malfunction. It was not a fluke. It was a masterclass in modern warfare from one of the finest tactical minds this country has ever produced." He gestured toward the screen still displaying the devastating results. "I suggest you take notes." In the days that followed, the story of what had happened in the forge spread through Fort Valor like wildfire. With each telling, the legend grew. Some said that Phantom had controlled the entire simulation with just one more in hand. Others claimed she had written the attack sequence in real time, improvising the entire assault. The truth, as always, was both more mundane and more impressive. She had simply understood the psychology of her opponents so thoroughly that their defeat had been inevitable from the moment they entered the arena. For the first 48 hours, Kate was an object of fascination and whispered conversation. Cadets would fall silent when she entered the mess hall, eyes tracking her movement, noting the rhythmic precision with which she walked on her prosthetics. But she remained apart from it all, eating alone, her face a mask of quiet concentration, as though still solving some complex problem in her head. Mitchell had vanished after the demonstration, taking sudden leave for personal reasons. His absence created a vacuum that only amplified the growing mythology around Kate Steele. Without his bombastic presence to counterbalance her quiet authority, she became the center of gravity at the academy. On the third day, as Kate reviewed simulation data in her temporary office, a soft knock came at the door. When she called for entry, Captain Ryan Turner, the leader of Alpha Squad, stepped inside. His face was drawn, his posture stiff with what might have been lingering embarrassment. He came to attention before her desk. "At ease, Captain," Kate said, her voice neutral. Turner relaxed slightly, but his discomfort remained evident. "Ma'am, I wanted to—" he began, then paused, struggling with the words. "I wanted to apologize for my team's performance." Kate studied him for a moment, seeing beyond the apology to the real question burning in his eyes. "You want to know how I did it?" she stated simply. Turner nodded, a flash of relief crossing his face at being understood. "Yes, ma'am, we've run that scenario a dozen times. We were prepared for every contingency in the book." "That was the problem," Kate replied, rising from her chair. She moved to a small coffee station in the corner, her gait smooth and controlled, betraying none of the difficulties that must have come with mastering her prosthetics. You were prepared for what was in the book. The enemy rarely reads the same books we do. She poured 2 cups of coffee, handed one to Turner, and gestured for him to sit. For the first time since her arrival, something in her demeanor softened slightly. Not warmth exactly, but a professional openness. What happened in there wasn't about technical superiority or better equipment, she continued. It was about perception. You and your team saw the environment as a set of physical challenges to be overcome. I saw it as a neural network, a system of perceptions and expectations that could be manipulated. Turner listened intently, his initial defensiveness giving way to genuine curiosity. You never even deployed standard opposition forces until the very end. I didn't need to, Kate said, her fingers absently tapping against her coffee mug. Your own training worked against you. You've been conditioned to respond to specific threats in specific ways. I simply created the perception of those threats without the substance. She set down her coffee and activated a small projector on her desk. The holographic display showed the layout of the forge with the paths of Alpha Squad highlighted in green. Here, she pointed to the first junction, where she had deployed the false audio cues. You split your team based on what you thought you heard. Standard procedure when encountering potential civilian presence during a raid. But it was the wrong move against an enemy who knows your playbook. For the next hour, Kate broke down the simulation step by step, showing Turner not just what she had done, but why it had worked. She explained the principles of cognitive warfare, how modern combat wasn't just about kinetic operations, but about controlling the information space. With each explanation, Turner's expression shifted from humbled to fascinated. This isn't in any of our training manuals, he said finally. No, Kate agreed, because it can't be taught through manuals. It has to be experienced. She deactivated the projection, which is why I'm conducting a special training session tomorrow at 0000, firing range 3, if you're interested. Turner stood immediately. I'll be there, ma'am. Bring anyone else who's serious about learning, she added as he headed for the door. But only those who can check their egos at the door. What I teach doesn't work if you're too proud to recognize your vulnerabilities. Turner nodded, a new respect evident in his eyes. Yes, ma'am. After he left, Kate returned to her desk. But instead of resuming her work, she opened a secure digital notebook. She began documenting her observations, not just of the simulation, but of Turner himself. His receptiveness, his ability to absorb criticism without defensiveness, his genuine desire to improve. These were the qualities she looked for in potential students. Not raw talent, not physical prowess, but the humility to recognize one's limitations and the courage to address them. The memory surfaced unbidden. Operation Desert Phantom, Iraq, 2007. She had been tasked with extracting a trapped reconnaissance team from a town controlled by insurgents. The intelligence had been flawed. The enemy force was 3 times larger than reported. Conventional wisdom said to abort, to wait for air support. But Kate had seen something others missed, a psychological vulnerability in the enemy's patrol patterns. They were too confident, too settled into routines. She had exploited that overconfidence, creating diversions that played on their expectations, misdirecting their attention, while her team slipped through their net. 7 operators rescued without firing a shot. It had been her first commendation, the beginning of her reputation as someone who could see beyond the obvious. The lesson had stayed with her through every subsequent mission. The most dangerous weapon wasn't the one in your hands, but the one in your mind. A soft chime from her desk pulled her back to the present. A message from Colonel Blackwood. Progress report on integration initiative requested by 1800 hours. Kate closed her notebook. The past was prologue. What mattered now was ensuring that its lessons weren't lost on the next generation of warriors. Dawn broke cold and clear over Fort Valor. The firing range, normally empty at this hour, held an unexpected assembly. Kate had anticipated perhaps a handful of cadets, Turner, and maybe 1 or 2 others curious enough to sacrifice sleep. Instead, she found 23 individuals standing at attention in the gray morning light, breath fogging in the chill air. Turner stood at their head, his expression a mixture of pride and uncertainty. Permission to join the training session, ma'am, he said as Kate approached. Alpha Squad and representatives from Bravo and Charlie. Kate surveyed the group, noting the mixture of defiance and curiosity in their eyes. Word had spread faster than she'd expected. These weren't just the curious, these were the best of each class, the ones with the most to lose by admitting they had more to learn. At ease, she said, moving to a table where several rifle cases lay closed. This isn't a standard marksmanship drill. Before we begin, I need to know you understand that. The cadets exchanged glances, uncertain what to expect. Kate unlatched the first case, revealing a disassembled M40A6 sniper rifle, its components laid out in precise order. The second case contained a Schmidt& Bender 525-56 PM PYY scope, one of the most advanced optics systems in the military arsenal. Shooting is not about strength, she said, her voice carrying across the range. It's not about aggression. It's about stillness. Her hands moved over the components of the rifle, not touching them yet. Before you can master any weapon, you must first master your own perceptions. She reached down and made a small adjustment to her left prosthetic, tightening a fitting that had loosened slightly. The gesture was deliberate, drawing their attention to what they had previously seen as a weakness. Some of you look at these, she indicated her legs, and see limitation. What you should see is adaptation. She straightened up. The human body is remarkably adaptable. So is the human mind, but only if you're willing to let go of what you think you know. With that, she began assembling the rifle. Her hands moved with hypnotic precision, each component finding its place with satisfying clicks and slides. The cadets watched, mesmerized by the fluid economy of her movements. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. In less than 60 seconds, the weapon was assembled, the scope mounted and secured. Without pausing, Kate lifted the rifle to her shoulder, sighted down the range, and fired 5 shots in rapid succession. The target's standard silhouettes at varying distances showed no immediate sign of impact. Check your targets, she instructed. Turner jogged downrange, returning with the first target. His face registered shock as he held it up. 5 holes grouped so tightly they formed a single ragged opening directly over the silhouette's heart. That's impossible, one of the cadets muttered. Not at that speed. Kate set the rifle down carefully. What you saw wasn't about natural talent or superhuman ability. It was about preparation and perception. She gestured for them to gather closer. I don't see a target when I look downrange. I see a problem to be solved, a set of variables: distance, wind temperature, humidity. My body doesn't make the shot. My mind does. For the next hour, she ran them through exercises that had nothing to do with pulling triggers. She blindfolded them and had them assemble their weapons by touch alone. She had them lie motionless for long periods, auto-controlling their breathing until their heartbeats slowed to the ideal rate for precision shooting. She taught them to feel the wind on their skin, to read the subtle clues the environment provided. This is how we trained in Task Force Black, she explained as they removed their blindfolds. Not just to shoot, but to sense, to understand the battlefield as a living system, not just a physical space. The cadets were silent, absorbing her words, beginning to understand that what she offered went beyond conventional tactics. This was a different paradigm altogether, one that challenged the foundations of their training. As the session concluded, Kate noticed a solitary figure watching from the edge of the range. Colonel Blackwood stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his face impassive. She nodded to him, a silent acknowledgement before turning back to the cadets. Same time tomorrow, she said. Bring only what you need, your weapon, your mind, and your willingness to learn. As the group dispersed, Turner lingered behind. Ma'am, he began, his voice lower now, confidential. What you showed us today, it's incredible, but I can't help wondering why I'm not still in the field, Kate finished for him, her tone matter-of-fact, not defensive. Turner nodded, his respect evident enough now that the question didn't feel inappropriate. Kate was silent for a moment, her gaze distant. Then she reached down and rapped her knuckles against her right prosthetic, producing a hollow sound. Titanium doesn't fatigue. It doesn't feel pain, but it doesn't adapt either. She looked back at Turner. I can still outshoot, outthink, and outmaneuver most operators in controlled conditions. But in the field where the variables multiply exponentially, the cost of failure is too high. She began packing up the demonstration rifles with methodical care. So I found another battlefield, one where I can still make a difference. Turner absorbed this, then straightened to attention and saluted. Thank you for the lesson, ma'am, all of them. Kate returned the salute with precision. As Turner walked away, Blackwood approached from his observation point. Impressive demonstration, he said, his eyes on the retreating cadets. You've got their attention. Attention isn't enough, Kate replied. They need to understand what they're really up against out there. The enemy has evolved. Our training needs to evolve with it. Blackwood nodded slowly. That's why you're here. The Integration Initiative is more than just a training program. It's a complete overhaul of how we prepare our people for modern warfare. And Sergeant Mitchell, Kate asked, naming the elephant in the room, he's a significant obstacle to that integration. Mitchell is... Blackwood paused, choosing his words carefully, reconsidering his position. Your demonstration in the forge was persuasive. A ghost of a smile touched Kate's lips. Not persuasive enough if he's still just reconsidering. He's a proud man, Blackwood said. 25 years of doing things one way. That's a lot of momentum to overcome. Pride gets people killed, Kate said flatly, closing the rifle case with a definitive click. I've seen it happen too many times. A shadow crossed Blackwood's face. So is he. That's what you don't know about James Mitchell. Before he was a training sergeant, he was one of Delta's best. Operation Crimson Shield 2011. His team was hit hard. Half of them didn't make it home. Kate went still, her hand resting on the rifle case. Crimson Shield, she repeated softly. The name carried weight memories. You know it, Blackwood observed. I know of it, Kate corrected. It was after my time in the field. Blackwood studied her for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision. Walk with me, he said, gesturing toward the path that led back to the main facility. As they walked, Blackwood filled in the gaps in Kate's knowledge. Mitchell had been a team leader during a high-risk extraction in northern Iraq. Intelligence failure had led his unit into a sophisticated ambush. Despite being wounded, Mitchell had held a defensive position for hours, covering the evacuation of his injured men. By the time extraction arrived, he was the only one still firing. The experience had changed him, hardened him into the man Kate had encountered, rigid, traditional, but driven by an unshakable commitment to preparing his soldiers for the worst. He believes in his methods because they're forged in blood, Blackwood concluded as they reached the administrative building. Just like yours. Kate absorbed this information, reassessing her understanding of the sergeant. His methods aren't wrong, she conceded. They're just incomplete. Today's battlefields require both the physical resilience he teaches and the cognitive adaptability I'm bringing to the table. That's the integration we need, Blackwood said, stopping at the entrance. And that's why, despite his colorful reception of you, I'm not replacing him. I need both of you. Kate raised an eyebrow. You're asking me to work with him. I'm asking you to help him evolve, Blackwood corrected, just like you're helping these cadets evolve. Before Kate could respond, the door to the administrative building swung open, and Sergeant James Mitchell himself stepped out. He stopped short at the sight of them, his expression guarded. The three stood in a triangle of tense silence, the weight of unspoken history and recent events hanging between them. Mitchell spoke first, his voice gruff but controlled. Colonel, Ms. Steele. Sergeant. Kate acknowledged, her tone neutral. Blackwood looked between them, then checked his watch. I have a call with command. I'll leave you two to coordinate. With a nod to each, he entered the building, the door closing behind him with a note of finality. Mitchell and Kate regarded each other in the morning light, two warriors from different worlds bound by common purpose, but separated by approach. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Mitchell broke the silence. I hear you've started an unofficial training program. His tone wasn't accusatory, merely factual. Supplemental training, Kate corrected, focusing on areas the standard curriculum doesn't cover. Mitchell nodded slowly. Mind if I observe tomorrow? The question surprised her, though she didn't show it. 0500, firing range 3. Bring your own weapon and an open mind. A faint, grudging smile flickered across Mitchell's weathered face. The weapon I can guarantee. The open mind, I'll work on it. As he turned to go, Kate called after him. Sergeant? He paused, looking back. Operation Crimson Shield. You did what had to be done. Anyone who's been there understands that. Mitchell's eyes narrowed slightly, reassessing her. The acknowledgement of shared experience, the recognition that beneath their differences lay a common foundation of sacrifice, shifted something in his stance. He gave a short nod, not quite ready for more, and continued on his way. Kate watched him go, thinking of the complex path that lay ahead. Integration was never simple, never painless. It required breaking down before building up, challenging before accepting. But it was necessary not just for the academy, but for the future of warfare itself. The following morning, when Kate arrived at the firing range, she found not only her cadets waiting, but Sergeant Mitchell as well. He stood apart from the group, his rifle case at his feet, his posture rigid but attentive. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, a silent acknowledgement of the territory they were about to navigate together. Kate began the session as she had the previous day, emphasizing perception over mere action, understanding over rote performance. As she demonstrated techniques for reading the battlefield with all senses, not just vision, she was aware of Mitchell watching intently, his expression, a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. Combat isn't just what you see, she explained to the group as they practiced detecting movement through peripheral vision. It's what you feel, what you hear, what you sense beneath the obvious. She had them close their eyes and identify the direction of sounds she created. Shell casings dropping on concrete, a magazine being loaded, the distinctive click of a safety being disengaged. Most of the cadets struggled, their perceptions too narrow, too focused on the expected. To her surprise, Mitchell stepped forward. "Permission to demonstrate, ma'am." Kate nodded, intrigued. Mitchell addressed the cadets. "In Fallujah 2004, we learned to identify insurgent positions by the sound signature of their weapons. AK-47s have a distinct report compared to our M4s. In urban fighting with sound bouncing off walls, this skill saved lives." He looked at Kate. "What Instructor Steele is teaching you isn't theoretical. It's survival." The endorsement coming from the man who had so recently dismissed her landed with impact among the cadets. They straightened their attention, sharpening. Mitchell stepped back, giving the floor back to Kate, but something had changed. A bridge had begun to form, tentative, fragile, but real. As the session progressed, Kate introduced an exercise in environmental awareness. She had the cadets lie prone with their rifles observing a distant tree line. But instead of focusing on potential targets, she instructed them to notice changes in the environment, birds taking flight shifts in the pattern of leaf movement, the subtle indicators that could reveal an enemy's position or movement. "This is how you detect what doesn't want to be detected," she explained. "Not by looking directly at it, but by seeing how it affects everything around it." Mitchell watched from the side, his arms crossed. When the exercise concluded, he approached Kate as the cadets gathered their equipment. "Unconventional," he commented, "but effective. Reminds me of some of the indigenous tracking techniques Delta incorporated after working with local forces in Afghanistan." Kate recognized the olive branch for what it was. "Different paths, same destination," she offered. Mitchell considered this, then nodded. "I'd like to incorporate some of these techniques into the standard curriculum. With your input, of course. And I could use your experience with squad tactics to enhance my cognitive warfare modules," Kate replied. Integration works both ways. A moment of understanding passed between them, not friendship, not yet, but professional respect beginning to take root. They were still two very different soldiers shaped by different eras and different philosophies of warfare. But they shared a common goal, preparing the next generation for the complexities of modern combat. As the cadets dispersed, one lingered behind a female cadet Kate had noticed during the exercises. Unlike the others, she had excelled at the perceptual awareness drills, showing a natural aptitude for the cognitive approach Kate was teaching. "Cadet Ramirez," Mitchell called, gesturing her over. "Instructor Steele, this is Jessica Ramirez, top of her class in marksmanship but struggling with the tactical decision-making modules." Ramirez stood at attention, her posture perfect, her expression carefully neutral. But Kate saw beyond the military bearing to the uncertainty beneath a soldier with technical skill, but still searching for her confidence in the chaos of combat. "At ease, cadet," Kate said. "I noticed your performance today. You have a natural awareness that can't be taught." Ramirez relaxed slightly. "Thank you, ma'am, but Sergeant Mitchell is right. I freeze up during scenario exercises. When the variables multiply, I lose clarity." Kate exchanged a glance with Mitchell, a silent communication passing between them. He nodded slightly, deferring to her judgment. "Meet me at the forge at 1900 hours, Kate said to Ramirez. "Empty facility, just you and me. I think I can help with that." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am," Ramirez replied, unable to completely hide her surprise and gratitude. As Ramirez departed, Mitchell lingered, watching her go. "She reminds me of you," he said to Kate, his voice lower, almost confidential. "Technical perfection, but still finding her way to tactical intuition. She has potential." "We all start somewhere," Kate replied, beginning to pack up her demonstration materials. "Even legends." Mitchell actually smiled at that, a genuine expression that softened the hard lines of his face. "Even legends," he agreed. He hesitated, then added, "Operation Iron Veil. That was you, wasn't it? The guardian angel that extracted SEAL Team 3. Kate paused, her hands stilling on the equipment. "That's classified, Sergeant. Not to someone who was there," Mitchell said quietly. "I was on that team, Steele, second squad leader. I never saw our overwatch. Never knew who it was that held off an entire enemy platoon so we could get our wounded out." His voice grew rough with memory. "But I heard the radio calls. I heard what happened after we lifted off." Kate said nothing, her expression unreadable. "They said our guardian angel took heavy fire. Multiple hits. that the extraction helicopter barely got there in time. Mitchell's eyes dropped to her prosthetics, then back to her face. I always wondered who would make that kind of sacrifice for men they didn't even know. The silence between them stretched, filled with the weight of shared history neither had recognized until now. Finally, Kate spoke, her voice level, but with an undercurrent of emotion she rarely allowed herself to show. You do what needs to be done, she said simply. That's the job. Mitchell nodded slowly, understanding completely. That's the job, he echoed. He straightened, resuming his professional demeanor. 1900 hours at the forge. I'd like to observe your session with Ramirez, if you don't object. Might help me understand your teaching methods better. Observation deck. Kate agreed, recognizing his request for what it was, not just professional interest, but a desire to bridge the gap between their worlds. But no interference. She needs to learn to trust her own perceptions first. Understood, Mitchell said. He gathered his rifle case and turned to go, then paused. For what it's worth, Steele, thank you. Not just for Iron Veil, for this. He gestured to the firing range where the cadets had trained. They deserve the best we can give them, both our perspectives. As he walked away, Kate allowed herself a moment of reflection. The collision of past and present, the unexpected connections revealed it was a reminder that warfare wasn't just about enemies and allies, tactics and strategies. It was about people, each carrying their own histories, their own wounds, their own lessons, hard-won on battlefields across the world. The integration initiative was taking shape not as a theoretical program imposed from above, but as an organic fusion of experience and innovation. Traditional and modern, physical and cognitive, Mitchell and Steele, different approaches united in common purpose. Later that evening, as Kate prepared for her session with Ramirez, she found herself thinking not about tactics or techniques, but about legacy. What would remain after the guns fell silent, after the last mission was completed, after the final salute was rendered, not medals or commendations, or even legends whispered in barracks. What remained was what was passed on the knowledge, the understanding, the ability to adapt and overcome, transferred from one generation of warriors to the next. That she realized was the true battlefield now. Not the forge, not the firing range, but the minds of these cadets who would carry forward what she and Mitchell taught them. It was a battle worth fighting with stakes just as high as any she had faced in the field. And for the first time since losing her legs on that distant classified battlefield, Catherine Phantom Steele felt the familiar surge of purpose that came with a mission that mattered, the sense that what she did today would echo long after she was gone. The forge hummed with the quiet energy of standby mode, its modular architecture waiting to be transformed into whatever battlefield scenario its controllers demanded. In the subdued evening lighting, the facility seemed larger, almost cathedral-like in its emptiness. Kate Steele stood at the central control station, fingers moving across the interface with practiced precision programming, a custom simulation that wasn't in any standard training protocol. At exactly 1900 hours, Cadet Jessica Ramirez arrived, her uniform crisp, her posture military perfect, despite the absence of other observers. Kate noticed the subtle signs of nervous energy, the slight tightness around her eyes, the too careful placement of each step. Ramirez was talented but unsure, a precision instrument that hadn't yet learned to trust its own calibration. Reporting as ordered, ma'am, Ramirez said, coming to attention. Kate nodded. At ease, cadet. She gestured toward the control station. Do you know why you're here? To address my tactical decision-making deficiencies, ma'am. Kate's expression remained neutral, but her voice softened slightly. That's the what, not the why. She turned back to the console, activating the final sequence. You're here because I see something in you that reminds me of myself at your stage. Technical excellence, but struggling to bridge the gap between knowing what to do and knowing when to do it. Ramirez's posture relaxed slightly, surprise registering briefly on her face. You struggled with that, ma'am. The records say you were top of your class in tactical assessment. Records don't show the failures that preceded the success, Kate replied, or the cost of the lessons. She reached down and tapped her prosthetic leg, the sound a hollow reminder of lessons paid for in blood. Sometimes the most valuable training comes from understanding where you're vulnerable. In the observation booth above, unseen but present, Sergeant Mitchell settled into a chair, his eyes fixed on the two women below. He had arrived early, watching Kate's meticulous preparation of the simulation parameters. What struck him was not just her technical proficiency, but the thoughtfulness behind each setting, She was creating not a test, but an experience specifically tailored to Ramirez's needs. Kate led Ramirez to the equipment station where a standard-issue tactical vest and training weapon waited. Tonight's simulation isn't about passing or failing. There are no scores, no records, no observers except me. She didn't mention Mitchell's presence. This was about Ramirez finding her own path, not performing for an audience. It's about understanding why you freeze when complexity increases. Ramirez nodded, sliding into the tactical vest with practiced ease. Permission to speak freely, ma'am. Always. I know what the problem is. When there's only one target, one objective, I perform well. When variables multiply, when civilians enter the equation, when mission parameters change mid-operation, I start second-guessing every decision. By the time I commit to an action, the opportunity is gone. Kate listened, hearing the echo of her own early struggles. You're overthinking, trying to find the perfect solution when there often isn't one. She handed Ramirez the training rifle. Tonight we're going to work on something different, not making better decisions, but making decisions better. The distinction hung in the air between them, a subtle but critical shift in perspective. Kate activated her tablet, and the forge began to transform around them. Walls rose from the floor, lighting shifted to the amber glow of late afternoon, and ambient sounds filled the space, distant traffic wind through open windows, the occasional voice speaking in a foreign language. I've created a scenario that will start simple and gradually increase in complexity, Kate explained. But unlike standard training scenarios, there are no predetermined correct actions. The simulation will respond organically to whatever choices you make. Ramirez checked her weapon, her expression a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. What's the mission objective? Navigate from point A to point B, Kate said, indicating markers on Ramirez's tactical display. That's it. The rest is up to you. Ramirez frowned slightly. That's unusually straightforward. The simplest paths often reveal the most about how we approach complexity, Kate replied. With a final tap on her tablet, she said, the simulation begins now. I'll be monitoring from the control station. Trust your instincts, cadet. As Kate moved away, Ramirez took a deep breath and began to advance through the simulated urban environment. It was modeled after a small town somewhere in Eastern Europe. Narrow streets, closely packed buildings, clotheslines stretched between balconies. At first, it seemed almost too easy. The streets were empty, the route clear. Then gradually complexity began to emerge. Civilians appeared going about their daily business. A market formed around a corner, forcing Ramirez to navigate through crowds. A military checkpoint materialized at a key intersection, requiring identification and explanation. None of these were direct threats, but each added a layer of unpredictability, each demanded a decision. In the control booth, Kate watched Ramirez's biometrics on the display, heart rate, respiration, pupil dilation. She could see the moment anxiety began to climb, could pinpoint exactly when the cadet's decision-making started to falter. But instead of intervening, she simply observed, gathering data, waiting for the pattern to emerge. Mitchell, watching both the simulation and Kate's methodical analysis, leaned forward with growing interest. This wasn't standard training methodology. It wasn't about reflexes or procedures or even tactical knowledge. It was about something more fundamental, the psychology of decision-making under pressure. An hour into the simulation, Ramirez encountered her first real challenge. A simulated explosion rocked a nearby building, sending civilians running in panic. Smoke filled the street, obscuring visibility. The direct path to her objective was now blocked by debris and fire. This was the moment when standard training dictated a specific response: secure the area, check for casualties, report the situation, then find an alternative route. Ramirez began to follow the protocol, but her movements were hesitant, her attention divided between competing priorities. Her heart rate spiked, her breathing became shallow. She was falling into the familiar pattern of overthinking, of trying to find the perfect solution. Kate's voice came through the communication system, calm and measured. What do you see, cadet? Ramirez scanned the chaotic scene. An IED strike, ma'am. Civilians injured, route compromised, possible secondary device. No, Kate interrupted gently. Not what your training tells you should be there. What do you actually see? The question cut through Ramirez's rising anxiety. She paused, truly looking at the scene before her. I see. People running away from the blast site, not toward it. The explosion pattern is consistent with a gas line rupture, not an IED. There's no evidence of tactical positioning that would suggest a secondary device. Good, Kate said. Now what does that tell you? That this is likely an accident, not an attack. Ramirez concluded, her voice steadier now. Priority should be civilian evacuation and finding an alternate route, not securing against a threat that isn't there. In the observation booth, Mitchell nodded unconsciously. It was a simple but profound shift, teaching the cadet to see what was actually happening, not what her anxiety or training templates predicted might be happening. To respond to reality, not fear. Ramirez began to move with more confidence, directing simulated civilians away from the danger, then finding a narrow alley that provided an alternative path. Her vitals stabilized, her movements became more fluid. She was no longer paralyzed by the multiplicity of options. She was adapting to the situation as it unfolded. Kate smiled slightly, seeing the transformation beginning. But the true test was still to come. With a few taps on her control tablet, she introduced the next layer of complexity, a squad of armed individuals appearing at the end of Ramirez's chosen escape route. Not clearly hostile, but certainly a complication. In the observation booth, Mitchell tensed. This was the kind of scenario that typically triggered Ramirez's decision paralysis. He watched intently as the cadet took cover, assessing the new development. To his surprise, instead of freezing, Ramirez did something unexpected. She removed her helmet, a direct violation of standard protocol in a potentially hostile situation, and set her weapon down where it was visible but not immediately accessible. Then she emerged partially from cover, hands empty and visible, and called out a greeting in the local language. It was an entirely human response, one that acknowledged the ambiguity of the situation instead of defaulting to a combat posture. The simulated squad leader responded cautiously but without aggression. A tense but non-violent negotiation ensued, with Ramirez explaining her presence and requesting passage. After a few moments, the squad parted, allowing her to continue on her path. Kate's voice came through the communications system again. "Why did you choose that approach, cadet?" "Their body language didn't read as hostile, ma'am," Ramirez replied, retrieving her weapon and helmet. "Their positioning wasn't tactically sound for an ambush. They appeared to be a local militia, probably responding to the explosion just like I was. Treating them as hostiles would have created a threat where none existed." "And if you had been wrong," Kate pressed, Ramirez considered this, "then I would have been in a compromised position. It was a calculated risk." Based on what? "Based on what I observed, not what I feared," Ramirez said, the insight crystallizing as she spoke it. In the observation booth, Mitchell sat back, a new understanding dawning on his face. This wasn't about teaching perfect tactical responses. It was about teaching discernment, the ability to see clearly in the midst of chaos, to distinguish between actual threats and perceived ones, to recognize when standard protocols helped and when they hindered. The simulation continued for another hour, each scenario carefully crafted to challenge Ramirez's perceptions and decision-making in different ways. Some required aggression, others restraint. Some had clear solutions, others only trade-offs. Throughout it all, Kate never told Ramirez what to do. She only asked questions that forced the cadet to articulate her own observations and reasoning. By the time Ramirez reached the final objective, a rooftop extraction point where a simulated helicopter waited, she was moving with a confidence and clarity that had been absent at the beginning. Her decisions weren't always textbook perfect, but they were decisive and grounded in reality rather than fear. As the simulation ended and the forge returned to its neutral state, Ramirez stood in the center of the room, sweat-soaked but exhilarated. Kate approached from the control station, her expression thoughtful. "What did you learn, cadet?" she asked simply. Ramirez considered the question carefully. "That I've been training to fight against scenarios, not to respond to situations. That I've been so focused on avoiding mistakes that I've been afraid to trust my own judgment." Kate nodded. "The most dangerous enemy on any battlefield is often our own fear, not of death or failure, but of uncertainty. We want clear lines, defined threats, unambiguous choices. Reality rarely obliges." She gestured around the now empty forge. "Traditional training teaches you what to do in specific scenarios, but modern warfare isn't about scenarios. It's about complexity, ambiguity, and adaptation. The soldiers who survive aren't just the ones who know the playbook. They're the ones who know when to throw it away." Ramirez straightened, a new understanding in her eyes. "Thank you, ma'am. When can we do this again?" "Tomorrow," Kate said, "and bring 2 others who you think would benefit from this approach. This isn't just about making you better. It's about creating a cadre who can teach others." As Ramirez departed, the observation booth door opened and Mitchell emerged. He descended the stairs slowly, his expression thoughtful, almost reverent. "I've been training soldiers for 15 years," he said as he approached Kate, "and I've never seen anything like what you just did." Kate was shutting down the simulation systems, her focus on the equipment rather than the compliment. "It's not revolutionary, it's just a different emphasis." "It's exactly what they need," Mitchell insisted. "These kids are going into a world where the rules keep changing, where the enemy doesn't wear uniforms or follow conventions. They need more than drills and protocols. They need this." He gestured at the forge encompassing what had just transpired. "Ramirez has been stuck at the same performance plateau for months. In 3 hours, you fundamentally changed how she approaches tactical problems." Kate finally looked up from the console, studying Mitchell's face. The antagonism that had marked their first encounter was gone, replaced by something that looked remarkably like respect. "It's not about replacing your methods, Sergeant," she said carefully. "It's about complementing them. Your drills give them the foundational skills. This gives them the judgment to apply those skills effectively." Mitchell nodded slowly. "Integration," he said, echoing Blackwood's term. "That's really what this is about, isn't it? Not your way versus mine. Both approaches working together." "That's the idea," Kate agreed. A moment of silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but weighted with the significance of the shift that had occurred. They were no longer adversaries defending their territories. They were colleagues recognizing the value in each other's approaches. "I'd like to incorporate elements of this into the standard curriculum," Mitchell said finally. "Not just as a specialized training module, but as a fundamental reorientation of how we prepare these soldiers." Kate's eyebrows rose slightly in surprise. "That's a significant change from your position 3 days ago." Mitchell's weathered face creased in a rueful smile. "3 days ago, I hadn't seen what you can do." The smile faded, his expression growing more solemn. "And I hadn't realized who you were, what you did for my men in Iron Vale." Kate's expression remained carefully neutral. "The past is relevant only insofar as it informs the present." "Spoken like a true operator," Mitchell said with a short laugh. "But the past matters still. What you did then saved lives. What you're doing now will save more." He gestured toward the door where Ramirez had exited. "That cadet will deploy with a level of situational awareness that might make the difference between mission success and failure, between life and death." Kate absorbed this, then nodded once, accepting the assessment. "We should meet with Blackwood tomorrow. If we're going to integrate these approaches across the curriculum, we'll need institutional support." "Blackwood's already on board," Mitchell said. "Has been from the beginning. He was just waiting for us to figure it out." The realization that they had been part of Blackwood's larger strategy all along brought a faint smile to Kate's lips. Clever old soldier. "The best kind," Mitchell agreed. He extended his hand. "To integration, Instructor Steele." Kate regarded the offered hand for a moment, then took it firmly. "To integration, Sergeant Mitchell." The handshake was brief but significant, a physical manifestation of the bridge being built between their two worlds. As they exited the forge together, discussing the practical aspects of curriculum revision, neither noticed Colonel Blackwood observing from the shadows of an upper walkway, a satisfied smile on his face. The following weeks saw a transformation at Fort Valor. What had begun as a grudging cooperation between Kate and Mitchell evolved into a genuine partnership. Their combined approach to training, Mitchell's emphasis on physical discipline and tactical fundamentals, paired with Kate's focus on cognitive flexibility and situational awareness, created a program unlike anything the Academy had seen before. Word spread beyond Fort Valor. Senior officers from other training facilities began to visit, observing the new methodologies with keen interest. The results were undeniable. Cadets exposed to the integrated curriculum were demonstrating unprecedented levels of adaptability and decision-making under pressure. Ramirez emerged as the star pupil, not just mastering the new approach, but helping to refine it. She worked closely with Kate, developing additional simulation scenarios that pushed the boundaries of conventional training. Her transformation from a technically proficient but hesitant cadet to a confident, adaptive leader became a testament to the power of the integrated methodology. One morning, 6 weeks after the confrontation in the forge, Kate arrived at her office to find Colonel Blackwood waiting, a thick folder on her desk. "Colonel," she greeted him, closing the door behind her. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Blackwood gestured to the chair behind her desk. "You might want to sit for this, Steele." Kate raised an eyebrow but complied, settling into her chair with the fluid grace that characterized all her movements. "Should I be concerned?" "Quite the opposite," Blackwood replied, opening the folder. The integration initiative has been noticed at the highest levels. The Secretary of Defense has personally reviewed the preliminary results. He slid a document across the desk. They want to implement this program across all special operations training facilities. Kate scanned the document, her expression neutral, despite the significance of what she was reading. This is substantial. It's unprecedented, Blackwood corrected. A complete overhaul of special operations training methodology based on what you and Mitchell have developed here. He leaned forward. They want you to head the implementation team. Kate looked up sharply. Me, you're the architect of the cognitive component. Mitchell will handle the physical training integration, but the heart of this, the paradigm shift in how we prepare operators for modern warfare, that's your contribution. Kate was silent for a moment, absorbing the implications. This would mean leaving Fort Valor. Eventually, yes, Blackwood acknowledged. The program would be headquartered at Fort Bragg with satellite implementations at all major SOCOM training facilities. A soft tap at the door interrupted them. Mitchell entered, followed by Ramirez, both looking somewhat confused at being summoned without explanation. Sergeant Cadet, Blackwood acknowledged them with a nod. Please join us. He waited until they were seated before continuing. I was just informing Instructor Steele about the future of the integration initiative. Mitchell's eyes widened slightly as he scanned the document Kate passed to him. This is happening already. Results speak for themselves, Blackwood said simply. The Secretary wants implementation to begin within 60 days. Ramirez sat quietly, aware that she was witnessing something significant, but unsure of her role in it. Kate noticed her uncertainty and addressed it directly. Cadet Ramirez, you're here because you've been an integral part of developing this program. Your insights have shaped how we approach the cognitive training modules. And Blackwood added, because you've been selected for the prototype implementation team, assuming you accept the assignment. Ramirez straightened, surprise giving way to pride. Sir, yes, sir, I accept. Blackwood smiled slightly. I thought you might. He turned back to Kate. The question is, do you? This is considerably more than you signed on for when you agreed to consult at Fort Valor. Kate was silent for the long moment, her gaze distant. When she had arrived at Fort Valor 6 weeks earlier, she had come with limited expectations: fulfill a short-term contract, provide some specialized training, move on to the next consulting assignment. She hadn't anticipated becoming the architect of a fundamental shift in military training philosophy. She certainly hadn't expected to find a sense of purpose more fulfilling than any she'd known since her active duty days. The position would come with a permanent commission, Blackwood added. Lieutenant Colonel with acceleration to full colonel upon successful implementation. Kate's eyes refocused on him. I left the military for a reason, Colonel. You left field operations, Blackwood corrected. This is different. This is about ensuring that the next generation of operators has every advantage we can give them, including the benefit of your experience. Mitchell, who had been silent as he processed the document, finally spoke. For what it's worth, Steele, there's no one better qualified. What you've built here, it's going to save lives, a lot of them. Kate looked at him, seeing the genuine belief in his eyes. 6 weeks ago, he had been her most vocal critic. Now he was her strongest advocate. The transformation spoke volumes about the impact of what they had created together. She turned to Ramirez, whose expression held a mixture of hope and determination. And you, Cadet, what's your assessment? Ramirez didn't hesitate. The integrated training changed how I think, ma'am. Not just about tactical problems, but about my own capabilities. Other operators deserve the same opportunity. Kate nodded slowly, then turned back to Blackwood. I have conditions. Name them, Blackwood said, unsurprised. Complete operational autonomy in developing the curriculum. No bureaucratic interference. Already guaranteed in the Secretary's directive. Mitchell comes with me as co-director of the physical training component. Mitchell blinked in surprise, but Blackwood merely nodded. Anticipated and approved. And Ramirez gets fast-tracked for officer candidacy upon completion of her current training cycle. This time Blackwood did pause, studying Kate thoughtfully. That's not typically how these things work. She's not a typical cadet, Kate replied evenly. She's the prototype for what this program can produce. I want her involved at every level of implementation. Ramirez sat very still, hardly daring to breathe as her future was discussed. Blackwood considered for a long moment, then nodded. I'll make it happen. Kate extended her hand. Then we have a deal, Colonel. As they shook hands, sealing the agreement, Kate felt a sense of completion that had eluded her since leaving active service. She had found a new mission, one that utilized all of her skills without being limited by her physical challenges. one that would extend her impact far beyond what she could have achieved as a single operator, no matter how legendary. The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Kate Mitchell and Ramirez formed the core of a development team that expanded to include specialists from across the military training establishment. The Integrated Combat Readiness Program, as it came to be officially known, grew from a local experiment to a cornerstone of special operations preparation. The Forge at Fort Valor became the prototype for a new generation of training facilities, more sophisticated, more flexible, designed to create not just soldiers who could follow orders, but warriors who could think independently in chaotic environments. 1 year after Kate's arrival at Fort Valor, the first class of operators trained under the fully implemented ICR program graduated. The ceremony was attended by the highest echelons of military leadership, including the Secretary of Defense. Kate, now Lieutenant Colonel Steele, stood with Mitchell as the graduates received their certifications. Among them was Jessica Ramirez, no longer a cadet, but a newly commissioned second lieutenant selected for direct entry into special operations training, an almost unprecedented achievement. She stood tall as she accepted her certification, her eyes meeting Kate's across the distance, a silent acknowledgement of how far they had both come. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed, Kate found herself alone with Mitchell on the observation deck overlooking the forge, the same spot where he had first mocked her, where their journey together had begun. "Hard to believe it's only been a year," Mitchell said, gazing down at the facility where cadets were already setting up for the next day's training. "Feels like a lifetime." "In some ways it has been," Kate agreed. "We've essentially rewritten the book on special operations training." Mitchell nodded, a hint of pride in his weathered features. "Not bad for a couple of old war horses." Kate smiled slightly at the description. "Speak for yourself, Sergeant. I've still got a few miles left in me." "More than a few," Mitchell said, his tone growing serious. "What you've built here, it's going to outlast both of us. That's a legacy most operators never get to see." Kate's gaze drifted to the training floor where the next generation of warriors was preparing to learn the lessons she and Mitchell had distilled from their own hard-won experiences. "Legacy isn't about monuments or recognition," she said quietly. "It's about impact, about making sure that those who come after have a better chance than we did." Mitchell studied her profile, seeing beyond the reserved exterior to the depth of purpose beneath. "You know, when you first arrived, all I saw was the prosthetics. I thought they defined you, limited you." Kate turned to face him, and her expression thoughtful. "They do define me in a way, just not the way you thought." She tapped her leg lightly. "These remind me every day of what's at stake, of why what we do matters." A comfortable silence fell between them, two warriors united by a common mission that transcended their individual journeys. The antagonism that had marked their first encounter had given way to mutual respect, then to friendship, and finally to something approaching family, the kind of bond forged only through shared purpose and hardship. Their reflective moment was interrupted by the arrival of Colonel Blackwood, accompanied by Ramirez in her new officer's uniform. Blackwood's face bore the satisfied expression of a man seeing his vision realized. "Lieutenant Colonel Steele, Sergeant Mitchell," he greeted them. "I thought you might like to know that the Secretary has just approved the expansion of the ICR program to include all Tier 1 operator training facilities worldwide. What began here is now the new standard for special operations preparation throughout the Allied forces." Mitchell whistled softly. "Global implementation, that's something." "It's what we've been working toward," Kate said, though even her typically composed expression betrayed a hint of awe at the scope of their achievement. Ramirez stepped forward, standing at attention. "Lieutenant Ramirez reporting, ma'am. I've been assigned to the implementation team for the European theater." Kate smiled, genuine warmth breaking through her professional demeanor. "At ease, Lieutenant. Congratulations on the assignment." "Thank you, ma'am." Ramirez hesitated, then added, "I wouldn't be here without your guidance. What you showed me about trusting my own perceptions, about adapting to complexity instead of fearing it, it changed everything." "You did the work," Kate replied simply. "I just showed you the path." Blackwood cleared his throat. "There's something else you should know." He handed Kate a sealed envelope. This came directly from the Secretary's office. Kate opened it, her expression shifting subtly as she read the contents. She looked up at Blackwood, a question in her eyes. "It's authentic," he confirmed. "Effective immediately." Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "Care to share with the class?" Kate handed him the letter. "The ICR program is being expanded beyond special operations. Elements of the cognitive adaptation training are being incorporated into basic training for all service branches. Mitchell's eyes widened as he grasped the implications. That's millions of service members across all branches. A fundamental shift in how we prepare Americans for military service, Blackwood said, undisguised pride in his voice. And it started right here with a training sergeant who believed in physical discipline in a civilian contractor with prosthetic legs. The four of them stood in silence, absorbing the magnitude of what they had accomplished. What had begun as a confrontation in the forge had evolved into a partnership that was now reshaping military training philosophy on a global scale. As the sun began to set over Fort Valor, casting long shadows across the training grounds, Kate thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a young operator determined to prove herself to a wounded warrior fighting for survival, to an instructor passing on the lessons of her experience, each phase had been necessary, each challenge had prepared her for what would follow. The loss of her legs, once seen as an end to her service, had instead become the beginning of her greatest contribution. By being forced from the battlefield, she had found a way to impact every battlefield where American forces would deploy for generations to come. Lieutenant Ramirez excused herself to prepare for her new assignment, her steps confident, her future bright. Blackwood followed shortly after leaving Kate and Mitchell alone again on the observation deck as darkness fell.
So, cuéntame.
Mitchell said finally, "What's next for the legendary Phantom? With the program going global, you could write your own ticket, any post, any assignment." Kate was quiet for a moment, considering. Then she turned to Mitchell, her decision already made. "I'm staying at Fort Valor. This is where it all began. This is where we'll continue to refine the program to ensure it evolves as warfare evolves." Mitchell nodded, unsurprised. "I figured as much. Never took you for a headquarters type." "What about you?" Kate asked. "The secretary's letter mentioned a promotion to Master Sergeant with your choice of assignments." Mitchell gazed out over the darkened forge. "Reckon I'll stick around too. Someone's got to make sure these kids learn how to function in the real world, not just in simulations." They shared a smile, acknowledging the comfortable rhythm they had established. Mitchell pushing physical excellence, Kate cultivating cognitive adaptation, each complementing the other's approach. As they prepared to leave, Mitchell paused at the door. "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were just another bureaucrat sent to complicate my job. I've never been so wrong about anyone in my life." Kate regarded him steadily. "And I thought you were a relic of an outdated approach to warfare. I was wrong too." "Guess we both had something to learn," Mitchell said with a chuckle. "Integration works both ways." "That it does," Kate agreed, echoing the phrase that had become the unofficial motto of their program. They walked together through the quiet halls of Fort Valor, two warriors from different worlds who had found common ground in their shared commitment to preparing the next generation for the complexities of modern warfare. Their initial antagonism had given way to mutual respect, then to a partnership that was changing the face of military training worldwide. The story of Catherine Phantom Steele and Sergeant James Mitchell would be told for years to come at Fort Valor and beyond, not just as a tale of personal redemption, but as a powerful reminder that true strength comes in many forms, and that the most profound victories are often won not through force of arms, but through the courage to evolve, to adapt, and to see beyond the limitations of the past. In the years that followed, thousands of operators would pass through the Integrated Combat Readiness Program. They would deploy to conflict zones around the world, facing challenges that no training could perfectly predict. But they would do so with a fundamental advantage: the ability to adapt to complexity, to trust their perceptions, to make decisions in the fog of uncertainty. And when these operators returned home, when they spoke of the training that had prepared them for the chaos of modern warfare, they would speak of two instructors, one with a booming voice and iron discipline, the other with prosthetic legs and penetrating insight. Different in approach, united in purpose, together forging a new generation of warriors, equipped not just to fight the wars of the present, but to adapt to the unknown challenges of the future. The forge at Fort Valor would remain the heart of this revolution in military training, a testament to what can be achieved when traditional strength is paired with innovative thinking, when physical courage meets cognitive flexibility, when the wisdom of experience embraces the possibilities of change. And at the center of it all, Catherine Phantom Steele would continue her most important mission, not as an operator on distant battlefields, but as the architect of a training philosophy that would save countless lives and ensure mission success long after her own service had ended. It wasn't the future she had envisioned when she first joined the military, driven by ambition and a desire to prove herself. It was something more valuable, a legacy not of personal glory, but of lives protected, of knowledge passed on, of wisdom, hard-earned on the battlefield, now serving a greater purpose. For a warrior whose career had been defined by silence and shadows, it was perhaps the most fitting tribute of all. Not a medal or a monument, but a fundamental change in how America prepared its defenders. Not a name in headlines, but an influence that would echo through generations of soldiers yet to come. In the quiet evening hours after the day's training was complete, Kate would sometimes stand alone in the empty forge, remembering the day she had first entered it, mocked for her prosthetic legs, dismissed as irrelevant, her capabilities unseen. She would remember the moment of vindication when her true identity was revealed, when respect was finally grudgingly given. But more importantly, she would look ahead to the future, being shaped by the program she had helped create, a future where operators would face unknown threats with the tools to adapt and overcome, where the lessons of her experience would help others navigate the chaos of modern warfare, where what she had learned at such great cost would serve the greater good. In those moments, Catherine Phantom Steele, the legend of Task Force Black, the guardian angel of Operation Iron Veil, would feel a deep sense of completion, the knowledge that her journey had led exactly where it needed to go. Not to glory or fame, but to purpose. Not to battlefield heroics, but to a quieter, more profound form of service. And in that service, in that purpose, she had found something that had eluded her. Even in her days as an elite operator, the certainty that her greatest contribution lay not in what she had done, but in what she had made possible for others to do. It was in the end the truest measure of a warrior, not the battles won or the medals earned, but the legacy left behind. Not the ability to dominate through force, but the wisdom to elevate through knowledge. Not the power to destroy, but the capacity to build something that would outlast any single soldier's service. In this, Catherine Phantom Steele had achieved a victory more lasting than any combat operation, more significant than any battlefield triumph. She had transformed loss into legacy, limitation into opportunity, personal setback into institutional progress. And in doing so, she had embodied the truth at the heart of the program she had helped create, that the greatest strength lies not in the absence of weakness, but in the ability to adapt, to evolve, to find new paths forward when old ones are closed. This was her story now, not a tale of what was lost, but of what was found. Not a narrative of endings, but of new beginnings. Not a legacy of one legendary operator's exploits, but of countless lives saved through the wisdom she had passed on. It was in every sense a mission accomplished.